Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. You are very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show here on Sky News this morning. Boris Johnson says he will lead the Tories into the next election, despite the calls for him to go over lockdown-breaking parties in Downing Street. The PM has arrived in India this morning, but he's followed by the backlash back home as the government tries to delay a vote to decide if there should be an investigation into whether he misled Parliament. In just a minute, we'll speak to the Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi. Also this morning, we'll get the views of Labour's West Streeting and the leader of the Lib Dems, that's Sir Ed Davey. It is Thursday, the 21st of April. Defiant, under pressure, Boris Johnson arrives in India, hoping to leave partygate behind him.
Here in Ahmedabad, the Prime Minister has just landed and he insists he will fight the next general election as he seeks to delay a vote back home over his conduct around Partygate.
Calls for special talks with Russia to evacuate Mariupol as a top ally of Vladimir Putin says the last pocket of resistance in the city will fall today.
Macron and Le Pen clash over Russia, immigration and the cost of living as the last remaining candidates in France's presidential elections go head-to-head.
Her Majesty turns 96. A new image is released in celebration of her birthday. Johnny Depp tells the court it was his ex-wife who was violent and abusive and not him, as he gives evidence about their relationship.
Clash over Wimbledon's decision to ban Russian and Belarusian players from this year's championships as the tennis world speaks out. We're live at Wimbledon.
Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, we'll take you to a glacier in Iceland for a first-hand look at the impact of climate change ahead of Earth Day. And find out why car parks in the New Forest are being closed as part of an effort to save endangered birds. Hello everybody, a very good morning to you. The Prime Minister says he fully intends to fight the next general election as Tory leader. The PM insists he won't resign after being fined by police for breaking his own lockdown rules or put himself forward for a confidence vote. MPs were due to vote later to decide if there should be an investigation into whether Mr Johnson misled Parliament. But the government is trying to delay that vote until the police inquiry has concluded and the full Sue Gray report has been published. Well, as you know from Betha, the PM is several thousand miles away from Westminster this morning. He has arrived in Ahmedabad in India just in the last few moments or so. During the trip, Boris Johnson is expected to announce a new trade agreement, including creating almost 11,000 jobs in the UK. Well, I'm pleased to say the Education Secretary Nadhim Zahawi is with us this morning. Got my new glasses on. What do you think?
Very smart.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see you. The PM just saying that he's going to fight the next election. Does he have your wholehearted support?
He certainly does.
Okay.
If you look at what he's been focused on, making sure that the global fight against inflation and the economic recovery is in place, an energy strategy, safer streets, and, of course, dealing with war in Europe. On all these issues, the Prime Minister has been leading at home and leading internationally. And this trip to India, we're announcing about £1 billion of, I think, deals already done in place, 11,000 jobs, a trade deal with the largest democracy in the world, slated to be the third largest economy by 2050. This is what I think your viewers will want their leader to be doing, and that's exactly what he is doing.
We'll come on to India if we may, but Partygate is still the albatross around the Prime Minister's neck. Why doesn't he just put himself forward for an investigation by the Privileges Committee himself and have done?
Well, I think in many ways, if you just step back a second and think about how we do things in this country and actually an exemplar to the rest of the world, due process is important. And what we are tabling today is an amendment to say, actually, the right chronology is that the police complete their investigation, the Cabinet Office report, the Sue Gray report, is published, and then Parliament can decide to refer this to the Privileges Committee. That is the right way of doing this if you follow due process. If you, just want to play politics with this, as Keir Starmer was sort of found out yesterday because he, probably inadvertently misled Parliament because he got overexcited and started accusing the Prime Minister.
Are you suggesting that the Leader of the Opposition has misled Parliament?
Well, David Evnett has actually put a letter into the Speaker of Parliament.
And you agree with that?
Well, because he accused the Prime Minister of something that he clearly had no evidence of. He accused the Prime Minister of attacking the BBC for their coverage in Ukraine. The Prime Minister did not do that, and by accusing him at the dispatch box, mistakenly, he should come and apologise and withdraw.
It's a bit pot kettle black, that, isn't it?
What's that?
That's a bit pot kettle black.
No, all I'm saying to you is, if you want to play politics with this, then the shenanigans that Labour are attempting today is the route. If you want to follow due process, then you allow the police to complete their investigation, you allow the Sue Gray report to be published, and then the Privileges Committee can look at that. That is what I'll be voting for today. The amendment is the right chronology and the right way to follow due process.
Or you could just be the Prime Minister and say, you know what? I'll just refer myself to the Privileges Committee, and then all of this nonsense that we're debating and taking up all my valuable time, I'll just put it in train.
But there is a police investigation.
Yeah,
there is
and it's already
a Cabinet Office
on some
report.
50 fines.
And there is a Cabinet Office report to be published.
Which is already reported in some scale.
Well, but we haven't seen the full report.
We've seen the abridged version.
Right, we haven't seen the full report.
And we've seen at least 50 fines.
And all I'm saying to you is due process is the right thing to follow. I think you'll find most of my colleagues who are fair-minded, who believe in due process, will vote for the amendment because it's the right thing to do. This is not the Prime Minister sort of saying, he's the Prime Minister who said, look, I'll come to Parliament and I will make a full statement. He's come to Parliament after receiving the fixed penalty notice, given a wholehearted apology, explained himself.
But then was a pantomime dame, we're told, in the 1922 committee just a few moments afterwards.
I think from those people who were present at the meeting, the detailed questions. And Roger Gale is a friend, and I believe he was there for 3 minutes, as he quite rightly made clear with your interview. But those who were there for the full meeting, so actually the Prime Minister dealt with the substance of the issue and talked about the economic recovery. We've got a global fight against inflation. People watching this today are worrying about the energy bills.
Of course they absolutely are. And the party instead is being damaged because of partygate. Up until, even before the Prime Minister was fined, 810 local council seats likely to be lost in the local elections because people don't trust the Prime Minister. That's 40% of all the seats that you were putting candidates up for. Clearly, this is something you can't move on from until the Prime Minister grasps it by the horns.
Well, the 5th of May is the poll that we should quote. I was with activists in Wandsworth a few weeks ago, and on the doorstep, what people are talking about is the low council tax being delivered in Wandsworth compared to Lambeth and Merton and other boroughs that are Labour-led.
I'm not going to let you take me down that route because you're going to get me in an awful lot of trouble when it comes to the local elections.
All I'm really saying to you, Kate, is that ultimately people make a choice for who they want to lead in their local area, in local government, based on delivery of services and value for money.
But partygate clearly does matter. You're a polling man, so let me quote you some polls. In fact, YouGov, that you once were joint owner of, that's found that by 2 to 1, the public wants him to resign. That was just after the partygate fine was issued.
Well, as I said, look, there will be polls on partygate, there'll be polls on the global fight against inflation. The real poll that matters is the 5th of May. And actually, on the doorstep, people want to see delivery of services at value for money. And that's what Conservatives are delivering in local government. And if you care about your council tax and make sure that your weekly bin collection, all the other things being delivered for you, then you vote Conservative as well.
Well, I have got some more polls for you. Another YouGov poll talking about how well the government is or isn't doing. I think we can put it up on the screen there. 72% think that government are doing badly on immigration, 70% badly on taxation, 68% badly on the NHS. That was a YouGov poll.
So, look, on immigration, I think part of the problem has been 3 years ago we were only getting about 300 people crossing that treacherous, illegal crossing through the channel. That's up to 28,000. So that's something that we're dealing with this historic deal with Rwanda, which I think is the right thing to do, remembering that these people...
Really?
I do. I tell you for why.
Why? Because just to remind our viewers of your background, you know, you came here as a young man. You couldn't speak English. You were an immigrant.
Yes.
If you did that today, you would be taken to Rwanda. And even if you passed all the tests, you'd have to stay there. You wouldn't be able to come here.
Yes, but it's tiny detail, which is really important. My parents fled a dictator from Iraq, landed in the first safe country, which is Britain, and made their life here. But hold on a second. But we came through a legal route and applied for immigration status and got that. These people who are being exploited by criminals are coming from a safe country called France. They are already in a safe country. They're choosing to be putting their lives at risk and being exploited by criminals.
But we have such a bad relationship with France now. We won't pay them.
Well,
we still owe them £52 million that we've promised to give to them in order to try to help with refugees, and we haven't given it to them.
We are grateful to the gendarmes and the intelligence sharing, and that intelligence sharing has been responsible for a number of illegal crossings being thwarted. But it's worth reminding viewers that actually those illegal crossings also mean capacity has been taken away from people who may not be able to make those illegal crossings, who are legitimate asylum seekers that we need to look after. And we've got a great track record in doing that. In that, since 2015, I think we've welcomed 185,000 people to this country from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Hong Kong, and now from Ukraine. As you know, we've got a dedicated team in the Department of Education where we're looking to place children from Ukraine in the first tranche. About 100,000 children is our
The scheme's
plan.
not working very well, though, is it?
Well, I'm very...
Even Robert Jenrick, the former housing minister, has said that it was very challenging. He's now taken in some refugees.
It was challenging, and
it continues to be so.
And we get better. So, one of the things we learned very quickly is having to go to a processing centre and get your visa physically was not necessary. You can do it online. The numbers are coming up. We're almost touching 60,000 people now. And, of course, in education...
We're a tech-savvy... first world country.
Sure.
It should have been much easier than this.
Look, we had to stand this up rapidly. The Home Office stood up the processing centres, I think, within a week and started processing the first visa applications. And people that evening started getting their visas through. We have a very proud track record of certainly in my department, of making sure every Afghan child is in school, in education. We'll do the same for the Ukrainian children. We've done the same for Hong Kongers. I think that's important. But this Rwanda deal is really important because we've got to break the business model of these criminals. We can't.
But Israel had a deal with them, didn't they? And it just didn't work.
Well, it's a very different. It was not like our deal. People compare us to the Australia deal and Israel. This is very different, and I think it's the right thing to do. I absolutely believe that we have to make sure we send a very clear message to people that it won't pay
Don't come here.
Come across illegally. No, come here legally. Right, back to my own story.
Okay.
Right, we fled Iraq from Saddam Hussein, came straight here to a safe country. These people are coming from France.
That's because you flew here, Minister. That's what I'm saying. You were privileged enough to be able to fly here. These people have to get on dinghies that sink in the channel.
But they're in France. They're in a safe country. They don't
We're
need
going
to
round
get
in
on
circles on that one. I need to ask you about India before we run out of time. Are you the Prime Minister there this morning, of course, are you completely comfortable doing a deal with a country that refuses to condemn Russia at the UN and the behaviour of Putin?
Well, India is the world's largest democracy. They are neutral on this. They know what our position is. The Prime Minister is taking a leadership position in making sure we defend the rights of the Ukrainian people. They have been illegally attacked, invaded. War crimes are being committed in the Ukraine. The Indian government is very aware of our position.
And yet India still won't condemn them.
Well, India's chosen a path of neutrality. I'm sure the Prime Minister will make very clear what our position is.
Worse than that, they're still buying Russian oil in rupees at huge discounts, and they obviously have weapons deals with Russian-made weaponry, and it's undermining the sanctions that most of the Western world is trying to implement.
you mentioned weapons. So around 65% of the Indian military hardware is Russian. We want to change that. We want to see India be looking at buying Western defence weapons and other weaponry. That's part of the trade deal.
I also mentioned talking about oil and it being discounted. And that is, in part, one of the reasons why our energy bills are increasing here in the United Kingdom. But we think it's the right thing to do. And yet Russia is not, India is not doing that.
Well, as I say, look, India is the world's largest democracy. They've taken a neutral position. We have taken a very different position. I am certain the Prime Minister...
Is it neutral if they're buying oil at a discount?
Will be... They have, in terms of the votes of the UN and the position they've taken overall. I think our position is clear on the illegality of the invasion of the Ukraine by Putin.
But they're propping up the Putin regime by doing this.
Well, and this is something that the Prime Minister will be discussing with his country. Of course, they will. Our position is very clear. But this trip is about trade. This trip is about building that deep trade relationship with a country that will be the third largest economy in the world by 2050.
But it's also about doing a deal with a country that's supporting the Putin regime, that is hammering people day and night in Ukraine illegally.
Well, I think that's a misrepresentation of India's position in terms of, they've chosen a path at the moment of neutrality. And I think we will make our position very clear. I'm sure the Prime Minister will talk about, why we have led, I hope, with our US and European colleagues on supporting the Ukrainian people. The Ukrainian people are putting up a really good fight. They're fighting like lions in the Donbass. This battle for the Donbass is going to be crucial to, I hope, reminding President Putin of the errors of judgment that he's made.
There's much still to do as far as your department is concerned as well. Are you going to get more of your civil servants back to work?
We are. We have been very clear that I want to see departments going back to levels of office occupancy that are pre-pandemic, so pre-pandemic working. Now, in saying that, I also want my teams out visiting nurseries, early years, schools, colleges and universities. And I think that's the right thing to do. But my absolute commitment is to make sure that people come back. I tell you, there's another good reason, is that the most junior staff can only really progress if we are together, whether it be in sanctuary buildings in London or in our great hub in Sheffield. We've doubled the number of people in Sheffield. We're up to 1,500 people now in Sheffield and other hubs in Darlington and elsewhere. So we want people back to pre-pandemic levels of office occupancy.
How soon?
What's that?
How quickly?
Oh, as soon as we're on it now. People are, and I have to say, we've delivered on skills. The skills bill is with the
You're going to get me in trouble. We're overrunning. You're going to get me in trouble.
Right. The skills bill we've delivered on, schools white paper, to make sure every child is entitled to a great school wherever they live in the country, and of course family hubs in half of England's local authorities.
Okay.
And I can't end this interview without wishing Her Majesty the Queen a happy birthday.
Absolutely right. Thank you. Oh, you've the TL thing. Is that because everybody thought it was Tory leader?
No, it's T levels, and I would have put it on, but I've had too many badges. I thought it's important to actually have this.
You would have looked like one of those mods or
United
rockers
Kingdom,
or something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's good to see you as always. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you. Well, the Partygate row is once again on many of the front pages this morning. The Eye says that Tory rebels fear a backlash from voters due to the controversy surrounding Boris Johnson's recent fine for breaking lockdown rules. The Guardian reports on the Prime Minister's bid to block an inquiry into whether he misled Parliament over Partygate, which it says has failed. On the front of the Times, the Children's Commissioner says England should follow Wales and Scotland and ban the smacking of children. The Telegraph goes with Russia's test of a new intercontinental ballistic missile known as Satan II, which is said to carry a dozen warheads. While the Mail says Prince Harry is being accused by royal staff of breathtaking arrogance following his US TV appearance. So, as we know, the Prime Minister is in India on a trade deal. We sent our political editor, Beth Rigby, of course, to be with him. Hi, Beth. A very good morning to you. You heard what the Minister was saying there. Despite what's happening with Russia, this deal will go ahead if possible. Your thoughts this morning? Good morning.
Hi, Kay. Well, yeah, you asked the Education Secretary there, didn't you, about Ukraine quite extensively. We asked the Prime Minister about that too on the plane. As you said, India has abstained on a vote in the Security Council. It has failed to explicitly condemn the invasion of Ukraine. Well, what did the Prime Minister say about it on the plane when we came over? He said that he would address some of these issues with Prime Minister Modi, who he will meet in New Delhi tomorrow. But he said that the UK had to do this with India as equal partners. He said that he had to recognise the historic relationship between India and Russia, and also recognise the relationship historically between the UK and India, the UK being a former colonial power. Perhaps the Indian government would not particularly appreciate the UK government telling them how to run their foreign policy. So it is a sensitive subject, but the Prime Minister was clear that he would certainly ask Prime Minister Modi, or talk to him at least, about the possibility of reducing India's dependence on Russian military equipment, and will of course raise the matters of Ukraine, but in quite a delicate way. The second big thing he wants to do here is that trade deal. Both countries want to get that done. They hope to nail it down by the end of the year. Both Prime Ministers with an eye on the 2024 elections they have respectively. But it will be tough. On the UK's part, they want to sell more alcoholic spirits, more cars and car parts to India. And on India's part, they would probably like more visas. Now, the Prime Minister opened the door to that on the plane, saying that the UK needed hundreds of thousands more workers, but that any immigration plan had to be controlled. So watch this space, see what they have to say on that. I think we're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister quite a bit today as he tries to keep the focus very much on what he's doing in India and very much away from what's going on back home.
OK, Beth, thanks very much. Thank you. Still to come on the programme for you this morning. We'll speak to the author and journalist Robert Hardman as the Queen celebrates her 96th birthday. UNICEF spokesperson in Ukraine, Toby Fricker, will be with us from Dnipro as the humanitarian crisis worsens there. Ahead of a vote on whether the PM should be investigated for misleading Parliament, we'll speak to former Tory Cabinet Minister David Gauke. Senior Ukrainian negotiators have offered to hold talks with Russia, in Mariupol, in a bid to evacuate troops and civilians from the besieged port city. But a top Putin ally claims that Russian forces will seize the Mariupol steel plant today, the last major stronghold of resistance in the city. Mariupol is strategically significant because it would help Russia create a land bridge with Crimea. Russian forces now control almost all of the city, with the last remaining Ukrainian troops holding on in the Azovstal steelworks. City authorities are hoping to evacuate around 6,000 people through a humanitarian corridor between Mariupol and I can't pronounce this one, forgive me. Zapiozazi. There you go. I know somebody who can, and that's Deborah. She's standing by for us in Kiev. Hi, Deborah. Good morning. So, will these talks go ahead, or is Mariupol about to fall?
That's a really good question. It's very unclear how anything good can come out of Mariupol at the moment. It's a city that's seen the worst of the fighting, and that's a pretty high bar given how devastated other parts of the country have been by Russia's invasion. But yes, you've got this ally of President Putin saying that he believes the city will fall by lunchtime today. It's this last pocket of resistance in this steelworks where you have Ukrainian fighters who have been holding out out against the odds, refusing to give up. If the city falls, that would be the largest city to fall to Russia in 8 weeks of war. And there is a belief that Russian forces are trying to achieve successes for the Kremlin by the 9th of May, which is the annual Victory Day, marking the end of the Second World War and Russia's defeat over the Russia's victory over the Nazis. But I was talking yesterday to a top Ukrainian official who doesn't believe Russia will achieve any successes by that date.
France's two remaining presidential candidates clashed in their only televised debate yesterday, 4 days before the country votes. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen still lags behind the centrist Emmanuel Macron in the polls, but millions of voters remain undecided.
I believe that the veil is a uniform imposed by the Islamists. I think the young women wearing them are forced to.
Stop mixing things up.
Do not give me a lesson.
I'm not giving you a lesson.
Do not give me a lesson on how to finance my plan.
Well, joining us now is our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn. Hi, Dom. How's it looking?
Well, it's a pretty fiery debate. I think the verdict coming out of last night's debate is that Le Pen did better than last time, but not well enough to change things. Last time in 2017, she was trounced by Emmanuel Macron, and that cemented her defeat in the election that followed. This time around, Macron was able to land punches on issues like the hijab, the Muslim headscarf, saying that would cause a civil war in France, but also on the fact that Le Pen's party has a loan from a Russian bank, and that was damaging in the current climate. And she got flustered after that, but regained her composure. Her challenge, Kay, in this election is to not come across as an extremist on immigration and the EU, both issues that she hasn't really changed her positions on, but she's trying to focus her fire on more populist issues, coming across as a champion of the ordinary French person on issues like the cost of living and economic issues. On those, Macron was able to unpick some of her plans a little, saying, how's she going to pay for them? But she was able to, I think, stand her ground. His challenge is that to many French, he's an annoying, arrogant ex-banker. And I think in his kind of exasperation with her, he will have come across to many voters, or some voters at least, as rather supercilious and snide and condescending. Having said that, he has emerged the winner in terms of the opinion polls. 6 out of 10 French voters saying they thought he was more convincing than Le Pen. I think, the consensus about debates is they don't change much in elections unless there's a big upset. There wasn't last night, and therefore I don't think this has done enough to restore Le Pen's fortunes in this election, not at the moment at least.
And we should just explain briefly why you are where you are this morning.
Yeah, I'm in Marine Le Pen's constituency, rather grand town hall behind me, the Hotel de Ville, Kay, and the area around here is surrounded by slag heaps. It's a kind of fading industrial area of northern France. It's where she has obviously an enormous amount of support, much better than Macron did in the first round of the election. So it's where she's hoping to sort of form her power base to try and take the presidency. As I say, though, it's a pretty uphill task, and I don't think last night's debate has really done enough to restore her fortunes.
OK, for now, thank you. Looking at some of today's other headlines for you now. A new official photo has been released by Buckingham Palace to mark the Queen's 96th birthday. The picture was taken in March in the grounds of Windsor Castle. On the Queen's left is the pony, a pony, by Beck Nightingale, and on her right is Beck Katie. Almost £500 million of taxpayers' money could have been wasted because the government failed to monitor coronavirus restrictions put in place for international travel, according to the National Audit Office. The report says there was no system to judge the success of measures such as the traffic light system and passenger locator forms. The Israeli military said that its warplanes struck a security post and part of an underground site used to produce rocket engines in Gaza. The strike comes after a rocket launched from the Palestinian territory landed in Israel. An investigation into a fatal shooting on the set of the Alec Baldwin movie Rust has found that there were willful and serious breaches of gun safety rules on set. Baldwin was pointing a gun at the cinematographer Helena Hutchins while preparing for a scene last October when it went off, killing her instantly. Johnny Depp has continued his testimony in his defamation trial against Amber Heard. The actor described a toxic relationship with his ex-wife, who he says abused him rather than the other way around. Here's David Blevins.
Relaxing to some reggae, Johnny Depp prepared for a second day in the witness box. But facing ex-wife Amber Heard in the courtroom, his testimony was far from chilled out. He recalled the moment she found him drinking vodka in Australia, where he was filming Pirates of the Caribbean 5.
She then grabbed that bottle and threw that at me. Honestly, I didn't feel the pain at first at all. I felt no pain whatsoever. And then I looked down and realized that the tip of my finger had been severed.
The court was shown this photograph of him in the emergency room and a more graphic one of what he described as his grotesque injury. The couple are suing each other, Depp seeking $50 million and Heard $100 million over a Washington Post opinion piece she wrote about domestic violence. He claimed he'd been the victim of abuse at her hands and that her allegations controlled his every waking second. Previously the subject of a libel action in London, their toxic relationship is now the talk of an American courtroom. David Blevins, Sky News, Washington.
There's more than one way, isn't there, to be immortalised on your 96th birthday. The Queen has been depicted as her very own Barbie doll to mark her platinum, she looks like Helen Mirren, doesn't she? Her platinum jubilee by toy maker Mattel. It's part of the tribute collection, which honours visionary individuals with an outstanding impact and legacy. The line launched last year, starting with a doll of the American actress Lucille Ball. Here's Lucy, here's Her Majesty. Let's kick off with the Express in the papers, which shows a very stylish Barbie doll as well of the Queen, made in honour of her Platinum Jubilee. That we've just been talking about, as you can see, picked up in the papers. Other headlines for you? There you go. This is an image from the Telegraph, which depicts a bit of a disagreement between two birds as an angry dunnock decided to attack a greenfinch with its sharp talons. You can see that not happy at all. And finally, the Mail features a very clever gold retriever. Dog owners managed to strike it rich after his puppy dug up some ancient gold coins valued at around £6,000, calling him a good boy. There you go. Our top stories for you this morning. Defiant under pressure, Boris Johnson arrives in India saying he intends to fight the next election as Conservative leader. Ukraine has called for special negotiations with Russia to evacuate its forces from Mariupol, along with the last remaining civilians. And the two final presidential candidates clash on TV before France goes to the polls. Well, a little earlier, I asked the Education Secretary why the government wants to delay a vote over the Prime Minister's partygate conduct. Nadhim Zahawi told me it's about following due process.
If you want to follow due process, then you allow the police to complete their investigation, you allow the Sue Gray report to be published, and then the Privileges Committee can look at that.
Or,
that is what I'll be voting for today. The amendment is the right chronology and the right way to follow due process.
Or you could just be the Prime Minister and say, you know what, I'll just refer myself to the Privileges Committee, and then all of this nonsense that we're debating and it taking up all my valuable time, I'll just put it in train.
No, there is a police investigation.
Yeah,
there is
and it's already reported
Cabinet Office
on some
report,
50 fines.
And there is a Cabinet Office report to be published.
Which is already reported in some scale.
Well, but we haven't seen the full report.
We've seen the abridged version.
Right, we haven't seen the full report.
And we've seen at least 50 fines.
And all I'm saying to you is due process is the right thing.
Ukrainian tennis star Elena Svitolina... Jackie's going to do this better than me. I don't know where my teeth are this morning. Svitolina has told Sky News that Russian and Belarusian players should be allowed to compete at Wimbledon if they speak out against the war. Players and administrators have criticised the All England club's decision to stop them competing at this year's tournament. I gave you a clue who's there for us this morning. Jackie is all over it for us. Jackie, good morning.
Good morning, Kay. Yes, Elina Svitolina is the player that you were talking about, who sent us a very strong message last night. Now, this decision by Wimbledon affects 5 of the male top 100 players, including the world number 2, Daniil Medvedev. It also affects 12 of the top 100 women, including the world number 4, Arina Zabalenka. And Wimbledon were keen to point out they're not against the players. This is not personal. This is to stop Russia using success at the championships to promote their regime. The LTA also followed suit, the Lawn Tennis Association, banning all the players, Russian players and Belarusian players, from the warm-up events, so Queens and Eastbourne. There will be no Russians in any of the events on grass this summer. Now, the ATP, the world governing body of the men's tour, and the WTA, the world governing body of the women's tour, have come out and strongly condemned Wimbledon for this decision. They say they do not agree with it. The ATP said it was unfair. The WTA said they were disappointed. Now, in their statement, the ATP said this has the potential to set a damaging precedent for the game, and discrimination against players based on nationality was a violation of their agreement with Wimbledon, because it should be based on ranking and merit, and the women's tour said pretty much the same thing. Now, there has been criticism from some players. Novak Djokovic, the world number 1, has come out and labelled it a crazy decision overnight, and we've been hearing from the top Ukrainian player, Elina Svitolina. She sent me this message last night. There was a joint message on social media from all the Ukrainian players yesterday saying they don't want a total ban on Russian and Belarusian players. What they do want is for them to publicly to come out and condemn the war.
I think, as we also made a statement today from Ukrainian tennis players, the best way would be not to ban completely, but make them speak about the war in Ukraine, to ask them if they support the invasion in Ukraine, if they support their government, and if they can answer those questions. If they say that they don't support it, they don't support Putin, they don't support Lukashenko, then they would be allowed to participate.
Haven't spoken out because, they're terrified of what might happen to either themselves or their families. It remains to be seen what will happen next. Will the ATP take further action against Wimbledon?
OK, thank you. Now, Ukrainian officials have reached out to Russia to open a humanitarian corridor in order to evacuate 6,000 women, children and elderly people from the besieged city of Mariupol. Joining us now is UNICEF spokesperson in Ukraine, Toby Fricker. He's in Dnipro. Hi, Toby. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. What is the situation at the moment? How important is this potential humanitarian corridor for the people of Mariupol?
Yeah, I mean, the humanitarian corridor and that safe passage out for civilians, for children, is absolutely critical. I mean, they're stuck in areas of extremely heavy fighting. People are in basements for days, for weeks, and now sort of months on end. And they need to get out. They need to get to safety. I've met children at the intensive care unit in Zaporizhzhia, which is a town south of Dnipro, where I am now. And, a 4-year-old boy who was injured trying to get out of an area of heavy fighting himself. So people need that guarantee that they can get safe passage out, and they need to get out as quickly as possible.
If they don't, what's going to happen? We've seen images of civilians literally cowering below those steelworks.
Yeah, I mean, the consequences are obviously horrific. I mean, the fighting goes on, the lack of food, there's a lack of running water. In fact, 1.4 million people across East Ukraine do not have access to running water. So they're seeking out dirty water sources. There are risks of disease outbreaks. And so the consequences are horrific on young lives, on children's lives. So whoever is stuck there and whoever wants to get out needs to have that safe passage so that we can reach them with, first of all, with medical support as soon as we can, but also with what's called the sort of psychological first aid, given the trauma that clearly they're going through.
What does that involve?
Well, it involves providing counselling, it involves providing emotional support, it involves providing some form of childhood again, and that means playing, that means a space for some relief. But the first thing is to get people out safely, Secondly, to make sure those people who come out are well enough and have the medical support they need. And then it's also start to rebuild their lives as much as we can while the war goes on across the country.
We're talking about Mariupol, but of course, city after city after city has found itself in a similar position, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Unfortunately, the war in the east is particularly concerning. It's intensifying, but also we've seen attacks in Lviv and other parts of the country. I met a mum with her 2-year-old Alice in Lviv, in a hospital in Lviv, and she'd been underground in the Kharkiv metro. Kharkiv is a city in the north that's been under attack, and they spent 32 days in the metro there. Fortunately, UNICEF and our local partners were able to provide some games, some fun in the metro station for kids who are stuck down there and providing some sort of psychological support. But she spent, 32 days. That's a horrific amount of days being underground. And her child had previously had some cancer surgery, was very weak already, and was in hospital now trying to recover from that ordeal.
Yeah, I remember seeing firsthand the work of UNICEF after in Sri Lanka, actually, after the tsunami back at the start of this century. And it's the games that you send out and the little welfare packs that these kids get that can actually make all the difference to them, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's about providing some form of childhood again and normality for children who are caught in the horrors of war. I mean, the trauma is massive, and every day that fear, that uncertainty of what's going to happen is horrendous. So it's just trying to provide some normality again, wherever you can, but also the critical needs that they have. And that means access to water, obviously food, and also, like I said, that psychological support as well. And then, education, trying to bring back some form of learning, informal learning, online learning as quickly as you can to get that sort of normality back.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks, Tony. Keep safe where you are there. Thank you. Now let's get more on the Queen's 96th birthday, which she is celebrating today. Maddie is standing by for us this morning at Buckingham Palace, as you can see. Hi, Maddie. 96 today. We've seen a fantastic photograph of her that was taken last month. How's she going to celebrate her birthday?
Good morning, Kay. Yes, there is that lovely photograph of her with the 2 Buyback ponies, Nightingale and Katie. There's also a Barbie doll that's been released of the Queen to mark her 96th birthday. Her in full long white gown, the tiara she wore when she got married, the ceremonial regalia. She's actually spending her birthday at the Sandringham estate in a cottage which was said to be loved by her husband, Prince Philip, because it's so close to the sea. But in London later, in Hyde Park at 12 o'clock, there will be a 42-gun salute. And then again at 1 o'clock, the Royal Honourable Artillery Company, will fire a 62-gun salute from Tower Wharf. So we expect the band will be playing Happy Birthday to Her Majesty and a bit of pomp and ceremony there. This is just a precursor. The full celebrations later this summer will be for her Jubilee. So it's more laid back and low key today, those 2 gun salutes and the band playing for her.
OK, that's great. It's good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Love your new jacket. Thank you, Maddie. Now, as the war in Ukraine continues, Ukrainians are finding new ways to express their sorrow. Have a look at this. An award-winning Ukrainian soprano has been singing in Japan for 2 decades and is dedicating her latest series of concerts to peace. Admission is free, but the crowds are asked to give donations for water, food and medicine for Ukraine. Ahead of a vote on whether the PM should be investigated for misleading Parliament, we'll speak to former Tory Justice Minister David Gauke. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. The Prime Minister has landed in India, hoping to leave the partygate scandal behind him. The PM insists he won't resign after being fined by police for breaking his own lockdown rules, or put himself forward for a confidence vote, or put himself forward to be investigated by other MPs. So, what does David Gauke, former Lord High Chancellor of Britain, former Justice Secretary, former Conservative MP, think about all of that? Mr. Gauke, good morning to you. Thank you for joining us. PM says, in fact, via his minister this morning, that it's the natural order to wait until the other two investigations have finished, and then he'll put himself forward for investigation by the committee here in the House of Commons.
I think the motion that has been put forward looks entirely reasonable. I think it's an entirely reasonable time to vote upon it. The motion is saying that the investigation by the Privileges Committee shouldn't begin until the police have fully reported and until the Sugray report has been published. But it seems perfectly reasonable to make the decision that there should be such an investigation at this point. And I think the difficulty for Conservative MPs is if they are seen to vote this down, OK, there might be a promise that there'll be another vote at a later stage, but clearly the intention of the government is not to hold such an investigation. And Conservative MPs who vote it down today can be accused of trying to cover up this issue, of trying to protect the Prime Minister from an investigation, when clearly an investigation is appropriate, given that the Prime Minister has already been found to have broken his own lockdown laws. And what Parliament needs to understand properly is whether he has misled Parliament as well.
You're a learned man. There's been a lot of comparison between a partygate fine and a parking fine being comparable. Is it?
No, it's not. And we have to remember that this, let's go back to the point at which these offences may have occurred. At that point, the government, including the Prime Minister, was stressing that this was of very great importance, that we all needed to play our part, that this was all about protecting lives. And that's why those rules were in place. So I think to dismiss these as minor issues, given the nature of the lockdown rules, given that the public messages that were coming from the government at the time, given that it was the Prime Minister himself who decided to impose these restrictions, I think the idea that these should just be dismissed as very minor offences and not really significant. And also, there is this issue here of what the Prime Minister has said to Parliament and the accusation of misleading Parliament. Now, it doesn't matter, if the Prime Minister had stood up and said, I've never committed a parking offence, and he had, that would be a serious matter, because you just can't mislead Parliament.
He says, as you well know, and I'll put it to you again, that on the two occasions that he allegedly misled Parliament, at that time, that's what he believed. And we can't disprove that. We don't know what was in his head at the time.
Well, I think that's the argument about whether he has misled Parliament or not, and that is what the Privileges Committee, committee made up of members of Parliament, should investigate. I think there comes a point, maybe it doesn't apply in the case of the birthday party, but there comes a point where if it is so obvious that it is a party, where there is so much evidence that there are drinks there, that there are nibbles there, maybe music is playing. We don't entirely know. We don't have all the information yet. But if the evidence is so clear that, in fact, it looked like a party, it sounded like a party, then, it is a party, and it's not credible for the Prime Minister to claim otherwise, and he thought otherwise. But that's for the committee to investigate. And I think it is right that it investigates that, specifically focused on the issue of whether he has misled Parliament or not.
But isn't the point, one that you just touched on there, that we don't know yet what all the evidence is? So why are we hang-drawn and quartering him when we don't actually know what either the police or Sugray have concluded?
Because this motion that the Labour Party has put forward isn't calling for him to be hanged, drawn or quartered. What it's saying is there should be an investigation. I think there is enough evidence there, given the police's conclusion in terms of the so-called birthday party, that there's a need for an investigation. What conclusions should be reached should be based on the evidence. And as I say, we're not talking about this investigation commencing until the police process has been completed. But I think it is reasonable at this point for Parliament to make it clear that the evidence is sufficient, that it is of such seriousness that there should be an investigation. But I agree, the investigation shouldn't start until the police have completed their process, and the evidence can then be put before the Privileges Committee.
OK. Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, an investigation into a fatal shooting on the set of the Alec Baldwin movie Rust has found that there were willful and serious breaches of gun safety rules on set. Baldwin was pointing a gun at the cinematographer Helena Hutchins while preparing for a scene last October when it went off, killing her. Our US correspondent Martha Kellner has this report.
It was a tragedy which rocked the film industry, horrifying even in an animated reenactment. Now, an official investigation has found the producers of the film Rust, including Alec Baldwin, were responsible for the death of cinematographer Helena Hutchins. A report by the state of New Mexico, where the film was being recorded, said producers willfully violated rules, showing a plain indifference to employee safety.
Rust Production failed in their obligation to provide a workplace free of recognized hazards. More specifically, there were several management failures and more than sufficient evidence to suggest that if standard industry practices were followed, the fatal shooting of Helena Hutchins and the serious injury to Joel Souza would not have occurred.
Alec Baldwin has previously said he didn't pull the trigger on the gun, that he didn't know how a live bullet came to be on this set. That is still subject of a criminal investigation, but the film's producers were found to have ignored safety warnings and fined the maximum amount of $136,000. Camera assistant Lane Looper had sounded the alarm, as he explained in an interview with Sky News last year.
I've never felt more unsafe on set or off set. You know, I've never felt I was more in danger of dying on the set or on the drive home, because I was exhausted.
Mr. Looper showed us a letter he wrote to a production manager before Hutchins' death. He cautions of 2 accidental firearms discharges. His warnings, the report found, went unheeded. If producers had abided by national standards for firearms safety on film sets, investigators said Helena Hutchins would most likely still be alive. A slice of accountability maybe, but for her husband and young son, the awful confirmation that her death was preventable. Martha Kellner, Sky News.
All today's top stories coming up for you at the top of the hour. Before that, quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Next few days will be mainly dry, cooler than recently, but there'll be a few showers around, mostly fine now, with a patchy ground frost in the north.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Still ahead in the next hour of the programme for you this Thursday morning here on The Breakfast Show on Sky. The Education Secretary has defended the government's decision to seek a delay on a vote on whether the PM should be investigated for allegedly misleading Parliament. We'll bring you reaction from Labour at the top of the next hour, and also the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, will be with us as well. And then a little bit later on after that, in the following hour, got a treat for you that relates to Little Mix. Stay tuned and find out more.